Hello, Eddie here, management teacher of Torrance University. So today, just before we start, I just want to show you again. This is our weekly activities. And basically we have this webinar on Tuesdays and Fridays and half an hour. And the other links, please bear in mind that the links are valid until 18th of December, and for the Friday ones, for the Friday link, it is valid until the 21st of December. So in other words, just before the Christmas break. Okay, I'm going to issue the new links for after the Christmas break. Okay, and assessment 1 is due on Friday week 6 or on the 21st of December. Please make sure that that we refer to Sydney time. Okay? All right, I expect you have downloaded the file from the Dropbox folder, because I have uploaded this presentation to the Dropbox folder. And we are going to discuss, if you refer to the learning resources, we are going to discuss the communication, organization structure, and also to discuss the research, basically. Okay, so this presentation will cover the communication part. Okay, and we are going to discuss the other topics next week. Okay. Right, so let's discuss about communication in the organization. Okay. Well, look, as we are all aware that organization consists of people, therefore we expect communication happens. Okay. In fact, if we go back to the social theory that we just completed in the previous session, we understand that the communication element here is quite critical for us to help building the social capital within the organization. Okay, so the communication in the organization cements the network in the organization. Okay, of course, we also understand that when it comes to communication to the outside of the organization, we also get the benefit from the communication process. Okay, all right. So let's zoom into the communication. And communication actually comes from the Latin word communis. Okay, and it means commonness. Okay, so what it tries to explain to us is actually when two parties are involved in the communication process, we expect these two parties try to create commonness between the two. Okay, so the more they communicate one to another, they actually create the commonness between the two. Okay, so they get the agreement between the two. In the negative perspective, they agree to disagree, for instance, but at least they got the they have the agreement about each party's position. Okay, now let's look at the communication model. Okay, and this one here is the communication model where we have the sender and also the receiver. Okay, so the sender has the objectives or intention. Okay, so the sender are basically those who send the message, okay, to the receiver. Okay, and the receiver in here you can also refer to target audience when it comes to mass communication. Okay, but in the case of interpersonal communication, we refer to receiver. Okay, so the sender in here has the purpose. Okay, they have something to achieve. Okay, either just kind of sharing their thoughts, or basically wanting to influence the receiver or get the agreement from the receiver, and so on and so forth. Okay, so they have the intention. Now that intention is going to be converted by the sender into certain message. Okay, this is what we call as the encoding process. Okay, in other words, the encoding process is the process that the sender undertakes to translate the purpose into message or into symbol. Okay, and then the sender will feed forward to the receiver because the sender expects certain results, okay, from the receiver. Okay, either certain action or whatever. Okay, now that message after the receiver receives, okay, the receiver will translate that message, okay, which is basically symbols or language, okay, back into meaning. Okay, so in other words, the receiver actually undertakes what we call as the decoding process. Okay, so they translate, the receiver will translate back the symbols that the sender is sends, okay, in certain format of language, okay, or codes, for instance, if it is in the if these two parties agree using certain codes, okay, and the sender and the receiver will translate that into certain meanings. Okay, so that will trigger the receiver to give feedback to the sender. Okay, now the feedback in here could be anything. Okay, that could be the agreement or disagreement or clarification. Okay, back to the sender. Now, the more this process goes back and forth between the sender and the receiver, we expect there will be more commonness, okay? Or the area of commonness will be greater between the sender and the receiver, okay? Now, in the communication process, unfortunately, that scenario is probably too good to be true in some situations, okay? Because in real life, the sender may also face what we call as the barriers, right? That stop both the sender and receiver to action to what they are going to decide between the two. Okay, so these barriers in here may also be labeled by some other communication scholars as the noise between them. Okay, so it what would be the barriers? The barriers in here would be anything that stops the achievement of the objective of the communication. Okay, that could be from the sender perspective. Okay, that could also be from the receiver perspective. Okay, that could be the symbol that they use, right? That maybe the symbol may not be translatable pretty well by the sender or by the receiver. Okay, that could also be the message channel or the media that they use. Okay, if it is using certain media such as telephone, for instance, the context of interpersonal communication. Okay, or in the context of meeting, that could be some other barriers as well. Okay, like the attention of the receivers and so on and so forth. Okay, so that could be the noise or the barriers, right, in this communication process. Okay, so that's basically the communication model. Okay, that we expect to be straightforward, I guess, in terms of how the communication process goes. Okay, it helps us, the model helps us to understand the elements in the communication. So when it comes to managing the communication, the organization, we need to be aware of who the receiver is, okay, what barriers that we might have, okay, and what channel that we can use, okay, to deliver a certain message, because the channel, the media that we use may also affect the message that we are going to convey. Okay, some scholars, some communication scholars suggest that the media may also the media is also the message. Okay, all right. So a number of barriers, as we discussed before. Okay, that could be the language. Okay, the language barriers. Okay, especially if we discuss with diverse group. Okay, and you may also recall that in today's business landscape, diversity is one of the flavors that we have in the organization. Okay, especially in markets like Australia, aside from getting the digitization, basically. Okay, so the language may be the barriers in the communication. Okay, the channel itself may also be the barriers, where some receivers may not be able to access the channel. Okay, if we send an email, that sometimes the server is down, for instance, so the receiver cannot access it. Okay, cultural can also be the barriers as well in the communication process. Okay, where especially again, if we discuss this in the context of diverse background. Okay, where some people might interpret something differently, and in the previous session we discussed about people from different culture may not say no, instead they say I will study it. Okay, psychological may also be another issue. Okay, so we may lose the attention. Okay, and from psychological perspective, we actually as a human being, we actually make a selection. Okay, make a range of selections, to be more precise. Selection of what? Selection of what we want to pay attention to. Okay, or in other words, it is selective attention. We also select the one that we want to memorize. Okay, selective retention. Okay, and we also select the one that we want to interpret, or selective perception. Okay, there are some communication messages that we hear. Okay, that's it. So it doesn't stay long in our mindsets. Okay, in our mental area. Okay, so it's just yeah, we hear it, we listen to it, but that's it. After we finish the conversation, that's it. It's gone. Okay. It could also be relational in terms of barriers to communication. You may recall that some communication psychologists help the relationships in the context of social life. Okay, but in the context of organization, it can also be an issue as well when it comes to relational. Some people who are quite close to among themselves, they may be quite well in terms of communication one to another. Okay, but on the other side, it may also create what we call as the groupthink, where we don't analyze it properly because of our relationship is quite strong, and as a result, we may, as a group, we may make a wrong decision. Okay, and environmental, basically another environmental issues could be another noise. Okay, when it comes to communication between two parties. Okay, right. So now let's look at the communication methods. Okay, we have what we call as the interactive communication, and also push and pull communication. Interactive communication here actually includes two parties, basically, to be more interactive in the communication. They get feedback straight away. Basically, they get feedback pretty fast in the context of interactive communication. And in today's business landscape, as discussed briefly, where one of the key characteristics today is the digitization of the workplace, we expect that to be more digital. Okay, you may at your workplace, you may send messages through your digital channel. Okay, like those who use IBM SameTime, for instance, they can just send a message to the other party Okay, so that helps making the communication getting faster actually between the two parties. All right, and from us with and the communication between our organization and the customers have also become more digitized as well. Okay, where consumers may post something on our Facebook page or our discussion forum, okay, or our online chat, where we expect to have someone in the organization to look after those messages. Okay, all right. And push communication is basically where we use certain media, where we push that message to the audience, okay? And the pull communication is actually about we pull the audience or the receiver to our communication message, okay? So meetings is another techniques in terms of communication where we exchange the information, okay? And we always have purpose when it comes to meetings, and that also includes the brainstorming or option evaluation or design, designing something, okay, and it also includes our decision making, okay, so it helps us to make a decision, all right. And therefore, since we intend to solve something in the meeting, it is recommended to have to outline the purpose, what the purpose is, okay, what the purpose of the meeting is, okay. So that's meetings, which is basically one of the channel, okay, in or technique in the communication. And when it comes to communication, I think it is also important for us to consider the stakeholders, right? Because that helps us managing the stakeholders' opinion, the stakeholder support to our plan, and so on and so forth. Okay, so broadly speaking, we have three types of stakeholders here. We have the stakeholders who oppose to our ideas. And on the other side, we have the stakeholders who have become the promoter of our ideas, right? In between, we have the fence sitter, right? Okay, I'm not here or there, I'm just sitting here, okay? So knowing who they are, if we can classify our stakeholders in the communication based on these three groups, that it will help us to determine our approach, okay, in the communication process. Okay. Now, again, in terms of the stakeholders, we can also think about the map them based on the engagements to help us in our communication messages as well. Okay, so we can group the stakeholders. We can list down the stakeholders. Okay, whether they are aware or not with our ideas or our projects, and whether they are resistant, neutral, supportive, or leading. Okay, so C in here reflects the current position. We expect if stakeholder one is unaware of our ideas, right, in the communication, we expect that we expect this stakeholder to move to supportive. Okay. And if we have stakeholder two being neutral, we expect the stakeholder to be supportive for us, okay, to our ideas. And if we have the third stakeholder who in the current position, this stakeholder has become our supporter. Okay, we expect that to maintain this stakeholder to maintain their position. And of course, those who are resistant, we expect them to change their mind, okay? But it is also important to understand why they resist, so we can, that helps us to understand how we can address the issues as well, okay? Right. And in terms of communication, we also need to consider who needs what information, right? In the stakeholder management, okay? When they need it, when they need the information, where the information should be stored, what format, and how the information can be retrieved. Okay. Now, organization has actually become more and more digital, as we discussed before, where we normally store the information, the shared drive or in the intranet, for instance, so everybody can access it, okay? And that actually one of the key features in today's workplace, where some organizations allow the employees to work from home, for instance, so they can access, because they can access the information anywhere as long as their gadgets or their machine is or computer is hooked up to the internet, okay? And in terms of when, you may also observe that a lot of when factors in here involve something like anytime, anywhere, actually, because of the digital approach of the information, okay? Right, well, you can also criticize how does it affect you, right? Because you are now able to access the information anywhere, anytime, basically. Okay, and the information has also become more and more the device and also the system have become more and more user friendly, so you can access the information easily. So what does it mean to you, okay, at the workplace? Does it mean you work around the clock, or if you go back to the management managerial role that we discussed in the beginning of the sessions, okay? Right, now this is a little bit of the interpersonal communication, where we expect individuals to, the employees to have the listening skills, and we need to be able to differentiate passive listening and active listening. The passive listening is actually only about to follow the gist, and the active listening actually requires the audience to get involved in the communication process. Okay, so they participate. Okay, they could clarify the issues. Okay, they and they express their opinion after they are required to do so. Okay, they delay the judgment, but then they they express their opinion after that, following the conversation. Okay. Right, just briefly about the active listening. There are a few things in here. I'm not going to discuss that in more details. You can look at the, normally people say we pay attention, show that we are listening, provide feedback. Okay, when we say provide feedback, we actually engage, we show that we are engaged in the conversation, differ judgment, okay, and respond appropriately. Okay, so there are a few things that we need to include when it comes to active listening. Okay. And the other thing is that just briefly about the communication skills. Okay, this is actually about giving feedback and receiving feedback. Okay, where in the communication skills, very likely we may be involved in the feedback process. Okay, so in terms of giving feedback, focus on the relevant behavior or the outcomes. Okay, not the person. That means we depersonalize the issue. Okay, deals with specific observable behavior. Okay, not the attitudes. Okay, because attitude cannot be seen, but behavior can be observed. Okay, and focus on how these people can improve. Okay, in our communication process. Okay. And in terms of receiving feedback, paraphrase, okay, so to understand, okay, so this is actually what you want from me, or this is actually what your feedback is all about, okay? Clarify and ask example, okay? And avoid being defensive, because people don't like us to be defensive when it comes to feedback, okay? Right, now, this one here is actually about the group communication network. We have two types of network. The first one is a centralized network. Second one is decentralized network. Okay. Well, you may also argue that the decentralized network actually help people to express themselves, right, freely. Yeah, it's true. Okay. But does it mean it is the most effective one? Well, hang on a second. You also need to look at the situation underpinning, the communication process in here. Okay, if you look at the decentralized network, we actually pretty much we have two types of decentralized network: circle and all channel or star. Okay, the circle in here, we have kind of, everybody is linked to the other person in terms of the network. Okay? Whilst in the all channel or star, basically everyone freely talks one to another. Okay. Now, if you urgently need to make a quick decision, probably the centralized network is something that you want to consider because of the speed that you can achieve. Okay, here we have someone that functions as the hub of the information, and that person will channel the information to their parties. All right, so you have the Y model or the wheel model or the chain model. Okay, so we always have someone to be the hub of the communication network. Okay, now it is also critical that if we assign a small team, kind of task force team, and we are thinking of using the centralized network, we need to also ensure that the center of the communication network, to function effectively, okay, to help us channeling the communication messages. Okay. Right, organizational communication channels. Broadly speaking, this is the traditional model of the organization structure. Okay, so we have the horizontal communication where people at the same level talk one to another. Okay, either getting the work done basically, or communication informally, and so on and so forth. Okay, whilst second type of the communication is basically vertical. We have vertical communication downward and upward. Okay, downward is basically we receive tasks, okay, or we receive something that our manager delegate to us. Okay, and upward is actually about our report. In terms of the organizational communication channel. Okay, right. So and it is also interesting to look at the organizational communication, because we also have what we call as the grapevine, or the gossips, okay, or the rumor in the organization. Well, we like it or not, we have that. We have that kind of informal communication in the organization. Okay, and if we are managing a project, for instance, or if we want to ensure that our message is clearly articulated, we need to understand who is the central in this informal communication channel. Okay, and we approach this person, and we can also get this person to help us spreading the message to the other people as well. Okay, so instead of going against them, we can get this person to be in our side. Okay, to help us spreading the communication. Okay, right. So as a summary, communication has a purpose. Okay, either kind of sharing our thoughts, or or we have an idea that we want to convey. Okay, therefore, in our communication process, we create commonness, okay, between us and the other party who is engaged in the communication. And in the communication process, we actually have some barriers that we need to achieve. Okay, and we have discussed a number of barriers in the communication process. Okay, they are the ones that we need to consider when it comes to planning our communication. Okay, therefore, you also want to think about, before engaging in the communication process, you may also want to think about the stakeholder management, basically, to help us managing the possible issues in the communication process. Okay. All right, I'll see you in the next session.